We're live. We are live. We are back. And I think we are hoping
We have a proposal for
we
you.
have a proposal.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, Deal Humphrey.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm not giving you a little. So we have a proposal for you. I don't know if we'll have time to get into all of the ins and outs of it, given that I think we're gonna have a roll call soon.
Okay.
And we have to go vote on the eyeballs. But I would love to share it with you, and then maybe you all can think and we can get back together after that, if that works.
Is that, yeah.
Okay, I mean, or Tuesday, I don't know, but it is Friday at almost 4.
Yeah.
So
Running out of time.
yes, John has language, Julia has Julia's stuff. I'm happy to start with either of them, but basically the idea, it's a few sections that we talked about. So given the sort of challenges in the carve outs that you all put on the excess spending threshold, which I think were in order to sort of ease the excess spending threshold, we thought it best to remove those carve outs and instead have a slightly slower path of lowering the excess spending thresholds that we set up as a ramp or a slide or whatever piece of playground equipment you want, a ladder even, whichever you want, from current law excess spending threshold for FY 27 to when we get the foundation formula. And we essentially tried to set the excess spending threshold as close to the foundation formula as possible so that they would come together. It is not apples to apples. The excess spending threshold is about education spending and weighted per pupil spending under that model. The foundation formula has a different construct for weighted students. It's going to be a smaller number of weighted students and actually a smaller universe of dollars to some degree, but this has as much sort of internal logic as we could construct while still trying to meet your need to, and really the state's need to lower the excess spending threshold and to keep costs steadier as we move towards the foundation formula. The other couple pieces we have here include a desire to, that's been much talked about, to find a way to meet the needs of the very lowest spending, very highest poverty districts as we move towards the foundation formula over the next few years. And so there's a categorical grant that's built to supplement, not supplant, that we could talk about being paid for by the money raised in the excess spending threshold, but we don't need to talk about it that way because really you can talk about it any way you want and it would all be sort of true. And then it's really a Friday afternoon talk I'm giving here, sorry. And then taking the construct that you have for the renter credit and using that construct and sort of to some degree mirroring it in the circuit breaker. The circuit breaker has not changed since the 90s, I believe.
97.
Since
Yeah, I
97.
would say, before I got here, it was at 35 once.
Yeah.
So I think it changed just about that.
So I don't know about you, but whenever I talk to anyone about the general fund transfer, I am asked, I think we've talked about this a lot in Ways and Means, and I think you've talked about it even when we came into appropriations about the bill, about the desire to target that buy down to the folks who might need it more. And given the way the yield and the income yield is constructed, it's practically impossible to target dollars in a way that works. This seems like one mechanism that might work a little bit. And so we're making, doing some work toward that. So those are
one, because the renter credit is 1 year. So this would be a 1 year.
this would be longer term, but let's look at it. It is a starting offer.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm going to stop with my intros and have someone who has better technical words this hour. And John and Julia just decided with head nods that it will be Julia.
Yes.
They probably do better than I do. We should go first.
Good afternoon. Julie right here, Joint Fiscal Office. Chair Kornheiser, what would you like me to start with?
I
have
think
a few
with
documents.
the excess spending constructs.
Sure. So, we do have printouts and I'm gonna be sharing this one about the excess spending threshold. And I'll go ahead and also share it on my screen. So this is the construct with, I'm assuming you want me to share it on the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
If anyone is watching the phone, they need to go home.
So as the chair just spoke to, this proposal would be to essentially change the way that the excess spending threshold is calculated to phase it into the Act 73 base amount. What we're looking at here is in FY 2030. So we know that the base amount in Act 73 is 15,033 increased by inflation. And so essentially the way that this construct would work is it would say, okay, we're going to put 15,033 as the new excess spending threshold into statute. And then to ramp into it in FY 2030, it would be increased by a percentage in FY 28, increased by a lower percentage in FY 29, and then it would be reaching 100% of the base amount in FY 2030. So we know in FY 27, for instance, that the base amount, that the excess spending threshold is 16,470. That's calculated by taking the FY 25 average per pupil spending, increasing it by inflation, and multiplying it by 118%, right? That's current law. That can also be seen as the FY 27 base amount multiplied by 103.4%. Would get you to the 16,470. So this proposal would be, okay, we're going to take the FY 28 base amount. We're going to multiply it by 102.3%, which would give us a threshold of 16,739. In FY 28, we're going to do the FY 29 base amount, which is the 1533 increased by inflation, multiplied by 101.1%, which would get us to this threshold, and then once 2030 comes to be, we would have fully transitioned into the Act 73 base amount. These other boxes in here are simply for reference. So this next, does that make sense so far? Okay. So this next box is showing the same thing. It's just showing a different math way to get there. So this first one is showing we're using the base amount and we're slowly ramping into it. This next one is saying we're still working off of this FY 25 average per pupil spend increased by inflation. We're going to multiply it by a percentage, and we're going to find the percentage that is equal to, that would bring us to the base amount. So you can see in FY 2030, both constructs are pretty much rounding. It's different, but pretty much reaching that FY 2030 base amount. It's just under the current law construct, it would be going down to 116.7% in FY 28, 115.5% in FY 29, and then 114.2% would be where you would be choosing to transition to. These last two tables show, for reference, if the excess spending threshold were not to be changed, and you weren't to make no changes to current law, and it would continue to be that average FY 25 per pupil spend increased by inflation multiplied by 118%, what the threshold is estimated to be. So you can see that it's dropping under these constructs. And lastly, this is showing what the Act 73 base amount is, which is literally the 1533 just increased by NEPA. So that's the construct that Chair Kornheiser was speaking to.
Okay. Is it helpful to see let's do the categorical grant?
Yeah.
Does that work for folks?
This sheet.
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
So straightforward.
So now I'm showing this one. I also printed copies. So this is the other proposal. The other piece that Representative Kornheiser was speaking to, which is essentially establishing a new categorical grant program. This would be calculated. A district must fall into all of the eligibility criteria in order to qualify for this grant. So the eligibility criteria that we've modeled and are included in the proposal language are: a district must be at least partially or fully operating, meaning they operate at least one grade. A district must, at least 45% of a district's students must be economically disadvantaged. That's one of the weighting categories, right? And then third, a district must also be within the 30 lowest per weighted pupil spending districts. So if you were to take all of the districts and you were to say the lowest spender is 1 and the highest spender is 119, that a district to qualify would also have to be between 1 and 30. That makes sense.
Because the idea is that these are students who are struggling in districts that are not able to spend on them for whatever reason. There are districts that are very economically disadvantaged that do spend, and there are districts that don't spend. They're not very economically disadvantaged. This is for sort of the high, low spending districts. And as like really towards that idea of beginning to at least make a movement towards bringing up the base.
That's a question on this. Did I hear that your partial intent would be these would be conditionally funded based on districts that choose to spend above the excess spending threshold with those double taxed dollars?
So we could some draft of this that John worked on, and I don't think this is in the draft language that he has anymore, is that you could prorate the grants to how much is raised in the excess spending threshold the year before. It's the total spending of it right now as it's structured is like 8 million.
Sure. So I guess, should we walk through number 2 first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So number 2 is what the grant amounts would be by district. So it would be based off of the district's long-term weighted membership, right? So if the district had 0 to 650 long-term weighted students, it would get 250,000, and then up by these amounts. These ranges represent looking at so under this construct, there are 20 districts that would be eligible under this eligibility criteria, these 1, 2, and 3 that would fit into all of these categories. So to determine these different brackets, it was established by the quartiles of those eligible districts, their weighted student count.
I didn't really quite answer your question, so I'm sorry. It at some point thought about prorating it. It seems like it would just be more complicated than was necessary, but it's certainly an option.
And then on those 20 districts that would qualify, are they all right around 45 to 55%? Or there's some that would I really don't know. Do they have 80% of students being economically disadvantaged? And I just wonder if there is such a variance, if there might be a reason to have this be more directed, but maybe these are questions for next year's legislation. Will be more directed towards the even more economically disadvantaged portion of the districts.
Yeah. Just scanning through, yeah, it would be quite a range. They're not all clustered on 45%. They don't have themselves.
But these would be decided not necessarily for what this would be the next year's legislature's work.
So I think that
I have to fund.
Yeah. it would be an appropriation. And the way that the appropriation is calculated would be statutory, just like your other categorical aid programs like special education are. transportation.
Also, I really like that construct, so the double tax rather than just going back to the pool, instead going to the districts that have the most difficulty passing budgets in a way, I'm guessing that's what this 20 district might be. I think that was the thought, yeah.
And so using these eligibility criteria, there are 20 districts that would qualify. This is all using the FY27 data, which is estimated to cost $12.5 million.
Questions structurally. You wouldn't know you're in the 1 through 30 until all the district budgets were in.
Okay, from the previous,
Use the previous year. Okay.
because gosh, that would be confusing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And maybe use the 40.
And they don't like move around all
And
that
maybe
much.
use the 45% from the previous year, because that
Mhm, yeah.
also is in flux. Okay.
Any other questions on this? Okay, let's go to the circuit breakers.
Sure, I don't have any prepared materials,
Oh, yep,
but I can talk about it.
that'd be great.
So we know under current law, there's two circuit breakers, right? There's the education circuit breaker, which is dependent on your income. You can only pay a certain percentage of your income for property taxes. That's covered, that's borne by the education fund, is included in that property tax credit line in the outlook 1B. There's also the municipal circuit breaker where it's the same idea. You can only pay a certain percentage of your income towards municipal property taxes. And that circuit breaker is a general fund expense. We are still working. So the proposal would be the upper threshold of both of those circuit breakers, the muni and the ed piece, is 47,000. The proposal would be to increase the 47,000 upper income threshold to 50,000. And 50.
Okay.
So by 3,000 for the household income. And also there's another provision within the property tax credit and the circuit breaker where there's a maximum credit, right? You can only get a credit up to within the education property tax credit space of 5,600 and in the municipal credit 2,400. So this proposal, in addition of raising that upper threshold from 47 to 50, it would also raise the maximum credit amount by the same percentage that income is being raised. So the 47 to 50 is an increase of 6%. So it would also, the proposal would also raise the maximum credit by 6%. So for the ed maximum credit, it would go from 5,600 to 6,000. And for the municipal credit, the maximum would go from 2,400 to 2,600. We're still finalizing the impacts of that. We are trying to reach a consensus figure with tax and a pretty complicated modeling, as you all know. But it's looking for the municipal circuit breaker to be somewhere in the ballpark of about $1.5 million. And for the education circuit breaker changes in the ballpark of 500,000. And those are, I really want to stress, very preliminary. Put a bit of a range around them because we're still going back and forth to land on where we feel most comfortable.
And this wouldn't be one.
This would be
Credit is a 1 year, correct? This.
That is how it's drafted, and John has the drafting language, if that's easier. If that's helpful for folks to look at.
I was following you, but can you clarify what do you mean by the 1.5 million in municipal and the 500,000 for ed? What do those numbers represent?
those represent, so we're increasing the cost of that circuit breaker, right? The cost of increasing the education circuit breaker and the maximum credit is in the ballpark of 500,000 to $1 million.
Yield
To the education fund, which means all else equal, everybody's property taxes would need to increase to cover that. And it's not large enough to significantly move the needle on rates or yields. On the municipal side, that very rough $1.5 million it would be a general fund expense.
And would this be this is for FY 27?
It's not, I was really hoping to do it for 27, talk to the tax department, and the programming would be too
Okay.
much on such short notice. I feel like we've been talking about this, at least in Ways and Means, like forever and ever and ever. And I actually don't think I've ever asked for how much it would cost before, which is embarrassing. And I was surprised how little it costs to move the needle a little in the grand scheme of things.
It just.
I know, it hasn't been moved in a long time. It's a big deal in people's lives.
No.
Yeah.
Do we know how many people this affects? Right.
That's a good question.
Must have been figured out.
Julia does summarize everything.
Give me 1 second.
Oh, I mean, the impact, I had a friend. His husband had early onset Alzheimer's. They were in from work, she needed to take care of him. Then Hardy isn't here, so I won't hear about the caregiver tax credit. But they managed to live below that 47,000. They reached the age where they had to take out 2,000 from their IRA, federal requirement. Taking out that 2,000 cost them $5,000 in additional taxes.
Because they were above the circuit breaker
Because
line
they
and
were
then
above
they.
Only because they were above the circuit breakers. So it is a significant savings to people that, I mean, in 1990, $35,000 was a lot more money.
Oh, right, that's why I've always wondered, this 47 doesn't seem particularly.
I always wondered when it went, I guess it changed the year I came here, so I moved with it. But 97 was the last time that was raised.
Yeah, long time.
I was interested if it were to have been pegged to an inflation index, what it would be. And of course, it depends on the inflation index that you choose, but it would be around 100,000.
I mean, people's tax lives, it would be very expensive. We'd also have very different. Everyone's property tax laws would be different there.
Right.
Pretty fascinating.
So I'll share my screen. I do want to caveat, this is modeling that was done last year when we were looking at the changes to the homestead exemption. So this is not going to completely answer your question, Rep Feltus, but it will give some sense of who we're looking at. So this table on the screen is looking at in FY 25. So albeit this is a couple years old, but what we're looking at here is how many filers or house sites fit within each one of these categories. So for instance, there's around 40 households that have a household income of 0 to 5,000 and a household value of 0 to 50,000. So you see the total number of households in each one of these incomes here. So if we're looking at this ballpark of 45 to 50,000, we know it would be somewhere less than 5,760 households who may be impacted. Of course, some households, it's cheaper for them to pay on property than it is for them to pay on income. So this may not help them. And we know by the cost that is the additional amount of relief that a group of households newly eligible would be experiencing. The other piece that I found interesting was when looking at the preliminary modeling, the increase of the maximum credit, I was expecting to have a more significant swing than it did. There are some, but the vast number of households are not hitting the maximum credit. So moving the maximum credit lever is less costly in this construct than moving the household income lever. And to be clear, moving the maximum credit lever is being done for all property all recipients of a property tax credit, not just those who would qualify for the circuit breaker.
In your counter proposal, are you leaving the renter's credit construct that we had?
This is ongoing. So this is really an adjustment to the tax code that should be done.
And I didn't say this out loud. We did all these other stuff with all your other stuff, but we're accepting this, the full transfer.
Oh, you
for-
say all our other stuff?
Well, we're accepting the full transfer for,
Of the 100%
Yeah.
for this year.
yes.
Okay.
So I should have led with that. Sorry.
Minus the renter's credit.
Minus the, yeah.
Okay, and this would be an additional.
So to be very sort of transactional, your construct on the buy down, our construct on the excess spending section.
That's it.
Like if you fuck me properly before the house.
That sounds delightful for them.
Do we have regarding more of this calculation? Do we indicate how many school districts these may affect?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I don't have that printed out and prepared for you, but I have done it, so I can share it on my screen, and I can follow up with either a hard copy or an email. I just need to pull that up. I guess perhaps I'm being a little too casual. The exact parameters that are on that sheet in front of you, I don't have ready. I could prepare. What I do have is, if you were to adjust the excess spending threshold to 116%, which districts would be affected and by how much? 114%, which districts would be affected and how much?
That would be what I would be interested in.
Do you want me to share it on the screen, or do you want me to get a hard paper copy for you?
I would love to have a hard paper copy.
Okay, I'll get those for the committee.
Okay, thanks. Also should mention that we moved that date 6 months on H1 for the exemption to the excess spending threshold for bonds approved prior to January 1st, 2025, instead of July 1st, 2024.
That takes care of Colchester and possibly a couple others.
I think it's just because they,
Right.
I wouldn't call it a typo, but it was like, we're correcting a loophole that's stuck in that we did not intend.
Okay, you're on page 2.
One of mine, but it's maybe, I have too many.
What are you looking at? Right, the one you handed to me.
I know,
Do we have
it's
it
the
here?
excess spending exemption, John.
Do you want me to come up?
Sure,
Yeah.
I don't think we have copies of what you're looking at.
you don't,
Oh.
sorry.
I will pull it up on the screen.
It's, does one have it?
Yes.
It posted,
Oh,
sorry.
Courtney will be posted.
Post it right now. Okay.
So,
And I'm sorry, I was not trying to be like, overly private or like holding this back. I've actually just been slightly scattered today.
It's that time of year.
Just because we start at 7:30, 8:00 every morning at.
so
We've had all of these like very random things in committee.
True, you also have.
Yes.
Yeah,
wonderful to be in that.
I will send you
Yes,
And I-
educational
technology.
please don't. John,
I'm John Gray with the Office of City Council. And I'm not gonna have to explain a lot because Julia has already explained it, which is good for me. But first is the excess spending exemption. This is the piece related to Colchester we we're just talking about.
Okay.
You'll know that this is in Title 16 rather than 32 because it's fully in its spending. And so the exclusion is right here. Currently, it's all bonds approved by voters prior to July 2024. That bumped back 6 months, January 1, 2025. Excess spending penalty, I tried to organize the leader assistance headings to call out when they apply, which I think is especially helpful in a document that's contemplating different thresholds for different years. This is amending the definition of excess spending, and it's going to look like a lot of changes. I mean, it is a change. But before I talk about the language itself, I think this was already implicit earlier, but the way to think about the excess spending as defined in law is it combines a bunch of concepts into one big definition, which is sort of unfortunate. If you think about it, it really consists of a base amount that's currently the FY25 spending inflated forward, and it consists of a threshold. And so what you're going to see here is breaking out the base and the threshold so that they can be manipulated separately. It's maintaining otherwise the same concept. So we're striking the long-winded definition that exists now and creating this, the excess spending base. It's the foundation formula base amount that in 2033 is adjusted for inflation. That was enacted in Act 73. And then we have the same inflator above. It is inflated from FY25, which is when that was set. And then you see the broken out excess spending threshold, which is 102.3% of the excess spending base. This ties back to the chart that Julia presented. Are we at 103.4 this year, FY27? But I guess what I would call it is just the chart you see lists FY27, which is not affected by the termination here, right? It's not changing anything that's happening going forward. That's just what the figure would be for FY27 if you converted the current FY25 that will be used into that. So you're only going to see 102.4.
So we're not changing FY27.
Exactly.
Budgets have been constructed and all the things, and we don't want anyone to have to get surprised by that.
Yeah, so don't take that chart to mean that something is changing this year. It's just that it's being converted into the base amount. This year, the 102.3% does reflect a reduction in FY28. The following year, FY29, that 102.3% goes down to 1.1%. What you can see is this going down, looks like 1.2 percentage points each year, or maybe 1.1, and it's roughly rounded. And so the following year, you hit that 100%, and that's when you would hit the foundation formula. So you no longer have such a thing as an excess threshold. Sections 4 and 5 are as the Senate proposed, but they're included in the language here. The renter credit expansion for claim year 2027. That's the bump up to the 3250 and the raise from 10% for market rent up to 12.5. So I'm just going to quickly go through those because that's exactly as the Senate proposed. The new piece here, the circuit breaker expansion, not at the same time as the renter credit expansion. This is FY28. And so pretty simple statutory changes. You're just bumping up that maximum income threshold for the circuit breaker from 47,000 up to 50. For both the municipal, which is what you see here, and also for the statewide. The one thing I do want to call it that looks odd about this section is because it's kicking in the year that the renter credit expansion is being rolled back and they amend the same statute. The unhighlighted language you see down here is just steadying the old language. So this is what you see in subsection B is returning the renter credit after claim year 2027. So in claim year 2028, we would be back to the current construct for the renter credit. That's the 2,500 cap and the 10% for market rent. You're going to see it again here. Again, they're combined. So this piece is the renter credit returning to current law. And the highlighted language is the increase to the statutory caps for the circuit breaker. So the 2,600 under current law, the municipal circuit breaker, that's your 2,400 cap that's being bumped up by $200 to 2,600. And then you receive a cumulative credit cap. So that includes your standard PTC that we talk about, plus any circuit breaker you get from the statewide. Currently that's 5,600 and it's bumped up to 6,000. So hopefully that all of that was already clear from Julia's presentation. I think this one is probably where the language is most meaningful. the economically burdened school districts state aid piece. This would be FY 28. You've got 3 eligibility conditions. Some of this, it sounds like, is relatively malleable based on some of the discussion that sort of Beck was raising related to when you would make the determination. But here you see economically burdened school districts are those that are receive aid under this section. And an economically burdened school district is one for which all of the following are true. At least 45% of the school district student population is economically disadvantaged under the pupil weighting section. So that's your less than or equal to 185% of federal poverty level. I don't have a modifier here, so I was thinking of this as of the most recent, but you could set this to a particular year. It could be the preceding school year's count if you wanted. The school district ranked among the 30 lowest spending school districts. In the language here I have in FY 27, but you could make it preceding year as measured by per pupil spending. And then the partially operational condition is what you see here. The school district operates at least one, so it would not be available to a district that otherwise met these two if they were fully tuitioning.
Okay.
So those are your 3 conditions for being an economically burdened school district.
That's a good question on this section. It is your intention really to leave, I know I already asked this question, but I want to clarify that any prioritization among those districts or the allocation of it, that would be determined next year as sort of guidelines as to which districts would get how much and would be prioritized.
So the allocation it's divided by quartiles. And so the smallest of, once a district is eligible, they're eligible. And then the amount they're eligible for is based on the size of the district.
Size of the district,
Meaning the number of weighted pupils in the district.
but not necessarily how many are at the university.
So they're what they've been determined, the district's been determined eligible,
Yep.
and then
Not third lowest, and then by size. So it's almost an entitlement if you qualify to get it.
This could absolutely be revisited next January, what was here before this has to be.
I
You keep
I
saying
mean-
that as you're saying something.
I'm just wondering if there's
I think-
other approaches to this.
I think that if, the one thing I would say is, there might be other approaches to it, and if this was in statute, these districts would be budgeting for it next year, and they would be basically finished with their budgets when we got together in January. So it would probably be rude to them to change it then.
Is this assuring them a certain amount of money that they would be able to count on this budgetary cycle?
This next for FY 28 budgetary cycle. Do you want to show that box plot?
Sure. So I have, I'll need to join the Zoom again. So while I'm joining the Zoom, I can talk about the intuition. If the grant, so there are these grant amounts, right? The 250, the 500, the 550, the million. Say that you agree to all of that. And the eligibility criteria is based off of the prior year. We would also know how much came in from the excess spending threshold in the prior year. So we would know, looking back to last year, we know which districts were eligible because we would know their economic disadvantage percentage. We would know their operating structure, and we would know where they ranked in per pupil spending. We would also know how much came in from the excess spending threshold. So really all we would need to do if the decision were to be agreed upon this year, that the excess spending, sorry, I clearly can't multitask this time of the week.
I was just thinking that about myself.
We would know all of that, so we could prorate the grant amounts down, and districts would be able to count on or know what was coming to them during the budget development cycle. With respect to how those quartiles were came up with, I do have a box plot which I can show, and I also have hard copies which I can pass around somewhere. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll find hard copies. So this is literally how we came up with, or not how Representative Kornheiser and the rest of the proposal.
I said, can you put this into quartiles, and Julia made the quartiles, to be clear. I did not make.
We can always have to give that attribution because JFL led council do so much of the work. We just talked about this stuff.
Thank you. So what we're looking at here is, we said, okay, we know that there are 20 districts that are eligible. We want to figure out how to evenly split up those districts by the eligible amounts. By the amounts based off of their long-term weighted membership. And so in order to create an even split, we did a box plot. And if you're not familiar with reading one of these, basically what we see here is the district that would qualify with the lowest long-term weighted membership has 192 of long-term weighted membership. The district with the highest weighted membership that would qualify, 3506. And then here we have the 25% tile, the 50th, and the 75th.
So maybe I'll put one thought on the table. I'm just wondering how much this correlates with the ability of districts to their spending levels, because it seems to me that where I would want with this new construct, redirecting excess spending threshold dollars to definitely go to the economically disadvantaged students, but the department districts with most of them, but also prioritizing the districts that just traditionally have difficulty passing higher budgetary amounts. And so I'm not sure that these are.
So you have to, in order to be eligible, you need to both be a poor district and a very low spending district. And so, and then once you're determined eligible in those two categories, then the amount you get is by the number of students you have. And when I looked through the list of districts that were eligible under this construct, they were exactly the districts that we talk about when we talk about worrying about the lowest spending districts.
I think I'm better understanding this.
There were like a couple surprises in there, but very few. And that was probably just because I hadn't paid attention to that district category. No, okay, we have it right here.
That's different.
Oh,
That's the excess.
oh, thank you. Yeah, will you put it up? Thanks.
Let me find it. The district by district. Okay.
And you're saying going into this budgetary cycle, these districts would have a general idea if they qualify and likely how much money they can expect.
So it would be determined by November 15th, right? Invested they don't have.
Okay, so they would get that information around that.
It's like along with all the other, they get a bunch of other information on it.
Market pact about the feasibility of that for this coming year.
No, because I believe AOE actually is who implements this kind of thing, and we cannot. Oh, I mean, kind of.
No big balking or concerns. Yes, okay. Just
Do I seem organized?
Autumn, did you tell our committee, we talked to you, we'll be a little bit later. Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Autumn, I'm sharing the one that in the top right says version 2. Okay.
They look so similar, but they have totally different information in this.
Yeah, the JFO branding. Thank you for so what we're looking at here is district. This is using all FY27 data, the latest budget data from the Agency of Education. Up here, I've included a little box reminding you of the eligibility criteria, right, that we've already walked through. Got your counties far left, next your school district. Next, you've got your long-term weighted membership. So this is if you qualify, how much you get is based off of this column. The next column is the FY27 percentage of students identified as economically disadvantaged. right? That's one of the eligibility criteria.
Send me the spreadsheet.
Yes, I may need to suppress some of it, but yes, I will send you the data once I can clean it up. The next column is your weighted per pupil spending. This is the estimated FY27. Again, this is what's used for the another eligibility criteria that you must be within the lowest 30 spending districts. This next column is the rank. 1 is the lowest spending district, 119 is the highest spending. So if the number is between 1 and 30, would qualify there. The next is according to AOE, the grades operated by that district. Partially operating, this is just a binary variable. 1, yes, it is partially operating. 0, no, it does not operate any grades. It needs to have a 1 in that column. Also qualify. And then lastly, you see if that district would be eligible for aid in the proposed amendment. 1, yes, it would be. You see there are 20, it would be. 2, the full grant amount in the proposed amendment. So again, that would cost 12.5 before being prorated down if that were to be the policy decision. And of course, that full grant amount corresponds with the weighted long-term membership. Again, flagging, this is all using FY27 data, but that is not total. That is just the latest data we have.
I just like using conditional formatting to help me highlight which ones are the higher. Economically disadvantaged split like spreadsheets.
I'm very happy to share it with you after we're off live.
Senator Connie, does it helpful for you all to take a look at all this and think that we can get back together on Tuesday?
I think so.
Okay.
Would you like to consider amending the language?
Yeah.
Yes, or we don't have to.
Yeah, no, they want to. Let's do
I
it.
just thought we're almost done with it.
So let's.
So sorry that we interrupted your
Very.
process.
Well, it's, you sent out somebody with people's school names on it, lose us. Never pass those out to the end.
Sorry.
This was the
company's already last.
Okay.
the uses. I just wanted to be clear on the supplement, not supplant. You can see the language there. But generally, as you see in the second sentence, they can use aid for any sort of standard budget process that's to tie to the budget exactly legal districts, except that they may not use it to place in a reserve fund, lower educated property taxes, or fund school construction authorized after June 30th, 2026. And then these are the numbers you just discussed. The 250K, if less than 650, 500K for 650 to 1300. 750K, 1300 to 2300, even a million above. And this is the process I think Senator Chinden was asking about. You include that appropriation as standard categorical aid is included in state within spending based on the prior year excess spending penalty revenues. And then starting on line 11, if the appropriation required to fund each exceeded the maximum amount, you would reduce pro rata, but you could do this in a number of different ways. The remainder is just conforming changes because the foundation formula is rolling out potentially FY30. You could, we have to repeal all the language around this to ensure that it doesn't disrupt any of that statutory language. We also have to redo the circuit breaker because it will have been changed by 73 provisions. So you have to redo those changes immediately following their enactment. And then I think it's easier to read the blue bracketed than it is to go to the effective date section itself. That's.
Thanks, Jim.
Question.
Yeah.
How, supplement versus supplant, like how,
So that's a major, sorry, you're not finished with your questions.
well, I don't know what my wish is, but how, I mean, if I'm making a budget and I know I've got $1 million hanging out there, and I say, you know what? Let's not offer something and well, I mean, how do you
Yeah.
do that?
So, I mean, yes, to all that.
Yeah,
And districts, like the only place that I've regularly seen language like this in federal funding or state funding is like it's occasionally used in federal funding in other places, but it's very, very common in education funding, especially in special education dollars. And they're used to actually being, and it's very, it used to be more stringently audited, it's now, but it's quite stringently audited. And so they're very used to actually meeting the intent of not supplant in a way that perhaps other business managers might not in other contexts. But it is used in other federal grants. I think the state actually has to use it for some federal money. And it is actually like taken at its words.
and so that, I guess it'd be to a second question. Have you had, and I don't know the names of the districts that are eligible, but how does this layer in the Title I monies? I mean, are these all
I've not
the
looked at
districts
that.
that get a whole pile of Title I too? Well, I don't know, but
It's a good question.
I
We haven't
suspect
looked at that.
that.
Yeah.
That districts would, well, I don't think the Title I monies, they don't care what the district is spending. What they're looking at is the operating ratio in the
Yeah.
district.
I think the construct was intended to look at those school districts that have restricted offerings for the students because the school budgets couldn't afford to pay those people. So it's like, here's additional resources to meet the needs of those students. So not to use the money to reduce taxes or use the money to do anything else other than to supplement what's offered to those students.
Yeah.
That's the
No
goal.
expanding schools. Maybe they don't have any. schools. Yeah.
Lastly, you need to run, but where did the 30 come from, the lowest per weighted pupil? Is that just based on quartiles? So you want the bottom 30? I just, I'd be worried about the 31st with like 60% economically disadvantaged. So I'm just wondering if there's another mathematical construct to determine that.
That would be a policy
So
decision.
there might be,
Yeah.
that's
Do we have an idea of the overall effect of these changes on the ed fund?
would cost how much?
Just, it would, you're gonna get more money in with an excess spending threshold up to a certain point. We're gonna pay out credits or the increased circuit breaker and other. How does that affect our total ed fund? Are we still gonna see a reduction in the ed fund?
No.
It does apply downward spending pressure, so we don't know how the
Yeah.
districts will respond.
Right.
But it's not a hard cap.
It's trying for the 12,500. For right corners everywhere.
Yeah, so that's the total cost of the grants if they weren't to be prorated down. I think the important piece, my hesitation is in part what Senator Chittenden said of the excess spending threshold is a soft cap, right? Districts can choose to spend over it, and if they spend over it, it is double taxed. The other piece of how much is raised from that overage spending is determined by what the property tax rates are. So for instance, I was curious of how much was being raised on the excess spending threshold in FY27. And when I went to look at it, I realized, well, it depends on what yield bill construct you look at, right? If you're using the 100.9 million, then obviously you're using that to lower property taxes. So a double taxing is not going to raise the same amount than if you're not using any of the one-time money. So all to say, on first glance, as I was looking at this, it doesn't seem that the decrease of the excess spending threshold would cover the full 12.5 million. And my understanding is that the 12.5 million would be prorated to match however much was raised from the excess spending threshold. And to your point, the circuit breaker would be an increase to the property tax credit, which would be an increase to what property taxes need to raise.
And so we're trying to meet two needs, maybe more than two, but two sort of summary needs. One is to stabilize spending in the total spending as we move towards the foundation formula. And the second is to bring up the base as we move towards the foundation formula. So districts are sort of closer to that. And those are two hard things to do at the same time, but just in the
You will
that.
prorate the amount that goes to advantage schools to the amount brought in by excess spending schools.
If you accept our proposal, that's what we'll
If you
do.
do, okay,
Similar to how pilot was a portion.
yes.
Really?
Sorry, I went
And
out
so
to.
highly successful and no one spends over, then we won't have any money to spend for the loan.
And if that happens, we can revisit this.
Okay.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.